In the United States, we don't care about the Tour de France. We don't care about bicycle racing altogether. I can't speak for everyone with that statement, but I guarantee if by any measure you were to rank the top 10 most popular sports in the United States, none of them would involve a bicycle. Yet a few years ago, one of the most well-known and respected athletes in the entire country was Lance Armstrong, the winner of the Tour de France. And it wasn't his racing victories that made him popular. He could have won 20 of them and I probably would have never heard about it. The reason he was popular is because he had a great story behind all these victories. In 1996, he was diagnosed with testicular cancer. It spread all through his body. He needed multiple surgeries, including a brain surgery. It was such a serious ordeal that there was a very real chance that he wouldn't live through it. But he did live through it. Within months, he was declared cancer-free. The next year, he established a non-profit foundation with the goal of helping those with cancer. 2 years later, he went on to win the Tour de France. The United States may not care about the race, but we can respect how difficult it is. Lance Armstrong won that race every year until 2005, making 7 consecutive victories, which was unheard of. He became somewhat of an American hero. As you would expect, the Lance Armstrong Foundation became really big during this time. They partnered with Nike to put out sports equipment and, more importantly, these yellow Livestrong bracelets. They were intended to bring awareness to cancer and show support for the victims, but they were so closely tied to Lance Armstrong himself, people saw them as sort of an inspirational message. Everyone knew how he came back from cancer to dominate his sport, so people would proudly wear them as a motivational reminder. If Lance can work hard and climb his way from the bottom to the top, then so could you. The message applies to sports, academics, health, anything that takes some work. It was all great. The charity was getting incredible exposure, they were doing good things for cancer patients, and a positive message was being spread. But in 2012, things went bad. Turns out Lance Armstrong wasn't quite the hero everyone made him out to be. He admitted to using performance-enhancing drugs that were banned from the competition.
Yes or no? Did you ever take banned substances to enhance your cycling performance?
Yes.
In short, he cheated. He lost all his Tour de France titles and was banned from ever winning another one. There's a huge ethical discussion surrounding this. On one hand, he cheated. He lied about it. He took the title away from someone that was trying to win it legitimately. On the other hand, the common argument is that everyone was doing it. It was the only way for anyone to win that race. And since everyone was doing it, he still won it through his skill and work ethic. Plus, consider all the people his foundation has helped as a result of these victories. They wouldn't have been anywhere near this size otherwise. All interesting topics we can discuss, but they've all been discussed before. The topic we don't hear much about is how this impacted the foundation. Well, soon after the scandal, Lance Armstrong left the foundation and they renamed it the Livestrong Foundation, which wasn't much of a stretch. Most people knew them as Livestrong anyway, since it was printed on those bracelets. Also soon after the scandal, Nike ended their association with them, meaning the end of the bracelets and all the equipment. People started taking their existing bracelets and crossing out the V to make it say Livestrong. Whichever side of the ethical discussion you take, you can't deny that the public felt betrayed. Wearing the bracelet was no longer inspirational. The names Armstrong and Livestrong went from being well liked to, I would say in many cases, being hated. I think we can safely say this wasn't good for the foundation, but how much were they impacted? On this channel, I regularly talk about accounting and I show financial statements, and there's always some people requesting that I go even deeper into it. Something happened with Livestrong that you don't see too often. A single event happened that greatly affected their business. So I figured this would be a good opportunity to walk you through some of the figures so you can actually see the impact for yourself. Now this could get a little boring for some. I get it, accounting is known to be boring, but try to stick with me here. It may start to get interesting. Livestrong is a non-profit, which like the name implies means they don't make a profit, but it also means they do their accounting a little differently. One of the big differences is the concept of restricted net assets. Think of it this way. You're donating $100 to Livestrong. You could either tell them go do whatever you want with the $100, or you could place a restriction on it. You could tell them something like, I want you to keep the $100 invested, but you can spend the interest you earn. The one where they get to use it for anything is called unrestricted. The one where they invest it and only spend the interest is called permanently restricted. There's also temporarily restricted. That's where you say keep the $100 invested for a year, and at that time you could spend the interest and the $100. You may want to re-listen to that if you didn't fully get it, because otherwise you'll just get completely overwhelmed when I show you their statement of activities. But it's not that bad. I'm going to tell you what it all means. Anyone can go to the Livestrong website and get these. First, it's their unrestricted net assets, all the money they receive that they could do anything with. This is a list of different sources they get their money from, contributions, grants, but the number we care about is here. Total net revenues. That's everything from the list added together to get the total money they've received that's unrestricted. This is the money they already had that's no longer restricted. Like when you said hold on to the 100 for a year then spend it, think of that 1 year being over for $3.9 million that were previously given to them. Add that number to the $49.6 million that were given to them this year, they received $53.5 million this year completely unrestricted. These three are a list of their expenses. The total expense is what we care about. It's all the money they spent this year. This line, marked change in unrestricted net assets, is the $53.5 million they received minus the $35.2 million that they spent. Meaning this year they gained $18.2 million that are completely unrestricted. For temporarily restricted net assets, people gave them $4.9 million with temporary restrictions, but $3.9 million were released from their restrictions, which we saw up here. Subtract the $3.9 million from the $4.9 million and it gives you about $1 million that have temporary restrictions. They also added $1 million to their permanently restricted net assets. These bottom three numbers are what we're most interested in. Typically, these would be the only three numbers I show. Everything else is just leading to these. The $20.2 million is just the three changes added together. The change in unrestricted, temporarily restricted, and permanently restricted net assets. The number basically means that they have an extra $20.2 million that they didn't have last year. So take their net assets at the beginning of the year, add the change in net assets during the year, and you get their net assets at the end of the year. That's their entire statement explained, except for the fact that it says the word net assets 10 times and I never explained what net assets were. By the way, if I lost you somewhere, don't worry about it because most of that doesn't matter. Here's where you really need to start understanding. Think of net assets as being a big pile of money. All these revenues add to the pile, all the expenses take away from the pile. In 2009, the pile started with $53 million and ended with $73 million. They added a bunch of money to it that year. Now I'm going to show you something that looks even more confusing. This is a spreadsheet I made that compiles all of the information together for the past 9 years. You can look at 2009 and see how it reflects everything you just saw. But focus on the last three lines. In 2009, their pile of money grew $20.2 million bigger. In 2010, it grew $17.4 million bigger. It kept growing until at the end of 2012, their pile was at its biggest. Keep in mind, Lance Armstrong was exposed at the end of 2012. In 2013, they took $6.9 million from the pile. In 2014, they took $8.8 million. Each year, they're taking money from it, until at the end of 2016, it was down to $62.8 million. Looking at the first line, the bulk of their revenue, it's gone down considerably since the scandal, but their expenses on the fourth line haven't gone down nearly as much. Here's what we can conclude. The scandal has hurt the company in a way where they're not getting nearly as much money as they once were. But since they've accumulated all this money back when things were good, they've been able to spend a lot and remain impactful. You can probably gather that this isn't sustainable. They could either continue at this level for a few more years then run into serious trouble, or lower their expenses and become smaller to adjust to their lower revenues. I know all that was probably somewhat confusing, but even even if you didn't follow every step, you should have gotten the overall idea. I have no intention of going into this much detail very often. This was just a special case where I thought it might be more rewarding to see it all for yourself, since the impact was so obvious. Let me know in the comments, were you able to follow all these numbers I gave you, but more importantly, what are your thoughts on what happened with Lance Armstrong? Is the lying and the cheating justified or not? Have you ever worn a Livestrong bracelet, or would you ever wear one again? And do you think it's fair that his former foundation is struggling like they are? I'd like to hear what you have to say. Thank you for watching.